Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you.
and speaking with us today. So tell me why you believe you're the right man to be the next mayor of Detroit, and what do you think about your resume that puts you in a very good position to advance the city?
Well, I have 3 skill sets that Detroit needs. One of them is housing. I have expertise in housing, building concepts. I've sold those concepts, went around the world, across this country, selling building systems like ICF blocks, utilizing alternative building materials to produce quality homes. Have the knowledge of how to mass produce quality homes. Well, Detroit needs about 400 to 450,000 new residents. We need homes, and so there's no other candidate with my expertise in housing. Also, I've called for a diverse economy, and so I've done 15 trade delegations / business delegations. I led the largest one out of Michigan, which was the one to the Middle East. Qatar, and we took 34 large corporations, GM, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Comerica Bank, etc. And they're doing, some of those companies are doing great business. Example of that is GM. When we took GM there, they were doing less than $1 billion. In 2024, they did $30 billion in the Middle East. So we facilitated some of that. We deserve some of that credit for that. And of course, we want to do that for Detroit, understanding that Detroit needs to build a diverse economy. Detroit needs international businesses, and of course, we need domestic companies to come here as well. So here again, I have the skill set because I've done over 15 trade delegations.
Let's talk about housing specifically. According to Detroit Future City, 85% of our housing stock is 50 years or older. It is aging. Combined with that, the infrastructure that desperately needs upgrading outside of that. Some 72,000 lead service lines, according to the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department, need to be replaced. This affects the health of our families, the homes they're living in, whether they're drinking water that's clean. We saw the Flint crisis and the tragedy there. So dealing with infrastructure, which housing is in some ways, how do you tackle that problem, and which do you start with?
Well, you know, that's a very good question. First time I've seen someone ask that question, but it's a great question. And the reason why it's a great question is because these 50-year-old houses or 100-year-old houses, they also have mold, mildew, fungus, lead, you know, there are a lot of health issues. And we talk about the cost of, you know, making these houses environmentally sound. At the same time, our infrastructure is broken in this city. We have flooding in so many different parts of the city. And I'll be straight with you. I think Great Lakes Water Authority have not given Detroit its just due. I think that we need to take our water back. I think Detroit needs to, it's $1 billion asset they took from Detroit, and Detroit only gets 30 million. And then we get overcharged. For example, there are some suburban cities. One of them is Livonia. They have a cheaper water rate than Detroit. So how is that fair for the people in the city of Detroit?
Let me ask you how the restructuring practically would go. Already, DWSD is struggling. I also spoke with them at the end of last week, and they said that they had some 30,000 people at the end of August last year, 2024, who were on their Lifeline program because they couldn't afford their water bills.
Right.
That's now been reduced to, as of Friday, 8,000. And that's because they just don't have the money anymore. They're going to need $800 million to replace those 72,000 lead service lines that I mentioned. Is there a restructuring that can occur between GLEWA and DWSD?
Absolutely.
It
must be, because it's not fair. And Detroit can do some of, you know, we're facing federal cuts, state cuts. Every municipal needs to be able to stand on its own. So Detroit's water, that lease, it needs to be renegotiated or it needs to be returned back to Detroit, because Detroiters need to fix their infrastructure. We have too many people in Detroit suffering from water cutoffs, flooding, just all of these issues. If government don't, if they don't solve your problem, those municipals have to step up and solve their own problems. And that's what we're about, being solution-based. We need to solve our own problems here in Detroit. And Great Lakes Water Authority have not done a good job in dealing with these infrastructure issues.
There are some people who would look at this and say, okay, clearly there needs to be some better negotiation and reimagining how GLEWA works. But this is a region. We are surrounded by the most Great Lakes, and Detroiters don't necessarily deserve water any more or less than any other suburb. There should be some kind of fairness. So because we probably would need some kind of regional coordination, if not GLEWA, then who?
Well, I think the most important thing here is a money-making asset was taken from the city of Detroit. Understanding that Detroit paid for all of the infrastructure for all the other municipals to have Detroit water, okay? So if we have to bring in a negotiator, or we utilize our Detroit City Law Department, to take this to court, I'm willing to do that as mayor, because I think Detroit was treated very unfairly.
You don't believe that Detroit should maintain its local lines, because the setup is, as of now, that GLEWA, again, works on a regional basis and does maintain certain elements of the water service, but every municipality deals with their own local lines.
Yes.
What other vision do you see for how that could be more fair? Isn't that fair?
It's not fair, because during the bankruptcy you took $1 billion asset. The question you asked is a good question, but we have to understand this. Whenever someone goes through bankruptcy, it's very seldom that you take their biggest money-making asset that could have been utilized to pay off the debt. You usually do not see a bankruptcy court or any entity take that money-making asset away from the people. So we're suffering with high water bills in Detroit, infrastructure issues, because that asset of $1 billion was taken from our city. And I think that's the main focus on what's fair.
Let's talk about the bankruptcy. We saw basically the big exit, and
Yes.
some people say we sold off Detroit as a result of that.
Yes.
There were a lot of agencies that are not managed by the city. They're managed by an authority. The Riverfront Conservancy is a great example. The Land Bank Authority obviously is separate,
Yes.
which their funding has been gutted. The same can be said for the Detroit Institute of Arts. So does Detroit own itself, or have we now become sort of a public-private partnership, which, by the way, some politicians think is the smartest way to do it? Do you think a lot of these independent assets and organizations need to come back to the city, or should we continue on in this vein?
They need to come back to the city. Detroit's assets, the spirit of Detroit, the culture of Detroit, you've stripped it, you've privatized city departments, you've weakened the community. That's what it has done. It has pretty much weakened the community. You struck down the residency requirements, so people are working with high-paying jobs in the city. They're living outside the city. We need to bring Detroit back to make it whole again. The assets of Detroit need to be returned. And I would take Detroit's law department and look at all of these leases and all of these situations, and I want to do what is right for Detroit residents.
What do you see as right at this moment?
What seems right is that we get our water department back, Belle Isle, and some of our other city assets. Because when city assets are taken, we find that the corporates benefit from that. The people don't benefit. It's just like energy, a municipal energy. You look at this country where you see where the people own their own utility. You see where they own their own water departments, etc. They're in much better condition or shape financially than allowing corporate to take these entities over.
Let me ask you about the debt, because the specific number that Judge Rhodes erased with this deal was $7 billion. And a lot of Detroiters felt like that was a reasonable deal. What would you have done differently back in 2014?
I would have fought the taking of Detroit's assets, period.
But how do you do that and still get us out of the debt situation that we were mired in?
Well, you know, here again, a lot of that debt was set in the future. In other words, it was looking at 5 years, 10 years from now, the financial condition of our city. And so that was not the proper analytical way to address the debt, okay? That was people from, university sorority, 3 or 4 people who were sorority members from the same university coming up with a strategy to take Detroit's assets. That was not really addressing the debt issues that could have been addressed. So it should have been done differently based on the now and some type of scheduled program to address that debt. But whenever you are in a bankruptcy, I have yet to see a bankruptcy court make a decision to take the biggest money-making asset of a community or of a people, or even as an individual bankruptcy. The asset is to help pay off the debt. So, you know, they use their political power to impress their idea upon Detroit and take Detroit's assets. When we ask the question, who benefits from Detroit's assets now? You might make an argument here that Detroiters are not benefiting from their assets.
Yeah, that's an argument that's been made by a lot of people, especially citizen activists who feel that this was a bargain that was terrible for the everyday Detroiter. However, forecasts are nebulous, and none of us are omniscient. We can't look into the future. Yeah. And it was a deal that allowed us to move forward, and we certainly have seen, according to Mayor Duggan, over the last 5 years, $1 billion, according to him, in affordable housing built in the city of Detroit. I can tell you anecdotally, almost every week we're at some kind of development that's come up. Brush Park, for example, 8 acres of land with 20 structures. Bedrock did get some abatements to see that happen, but that's, so much housing for people, and where vacant land once stood, now you have homes. So,
if I may,
yes. So
because a lot of young people still have to leave Detroit because they can't get housing. A lot of seniors have to leave Detroit because they can't get housing. We have to understand 450,000 people to bring Detroit back to 1.1 million population, 1.2 million. We need about 400,000 more people coming back into our city. So when we talk about what we're seeing today, it's not really enough to address the issue. I understand the whole country has housing issues now. So this is why, as mayor, I'm saying, let's start a municipal manufacturing facility in the city of Detroit. I'm the only one that has this 23 years of building concept experience. So I'm saying, okay, we can create 10,000 jobs right here in the city. We can put billions of dollars in our community, billions of dollars in our city treasury by partnering with these innovative companies that can build quality homes here in our city. So you're giving the taxpayer, the voter, something for their vote, something for their money. And so basically you look at what Detroit needs. Detroit has approximately 1/3 vacant land. City of Boston is close to it, about 48 miles. That's $270 billion value, City of Boston. So we clearly could see that as $100 billion of real estate development left here in the city of Detroit.
Well, we have 18 square miles of vacant land.
Okay, 18 square miles, okay. So, but then we have a lot of lots and other, because the land bank has about 60,000 lots on its own right now.
Yes, and in the pipeline there's like 3,000.
So if you look at 60,000 lots and you look at a 1,200 square foot home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It takes about, to build 10,000 of those homes, you're talking about $1 billion to $1.5 billion, okay? And so basically, here again, 10,000 homes, yes, it's good for the population to have those homes, but we need mass production. We need to be building 25,000 homes, and we can do that through having our own industry right here in Detroit. Because if we get a lot of outside developers coming in, they're taking money out. And the question is, there's never inclusion. There's never enough procurement programs for the people that live in the city.
Let me understand. I want to flesh out the idea of municipal manufacturing. Are you talking about basically a socialist program where the city would be in charge of manufacturing houses?
The city will partner.
Okay.
It will be a municipal partnership. Okay. Detroit only has one asset left, and that's land. Because everyone else has taken Detroit's assets. It's under Great Lakes Water Authority, the water, Belle Isle's under the state, et cetera, et cetera. So at what point in time does Detroit residents get something for their vote, something for their tax dollars? So what we have now, we have a lot of people complaining, oh, there's never inclusion. We get these promises, these CBOs, community benefit ordinances, agreements, but everybody breaks them. So the jobs that Detroit residents are supposed to get, they never get them. Somebody has to come in and make a change here.
Many of the projects that have been underway in Detroit, there are usually some sort of negotiation that goes into trying to attract Detroit contractors to work on them. Typically with housing, there's usually an affordable housing component with almost every new structure that goes up that's residential, if it's a multifamily structure or apartments. So some of that is happening. How is that different, since we're already seeing partnerships with corporations to build in the city and some independent developers to build in the city? How would this be different than the path we're already on?
Because you would have a community benefits agreement binding in court. So if a developer or company does not keep their word, the people in the city of Detroit will have recourse to take them to court to enforce that agreement.
Do we have the kind of infrastructure to carry something like this out?
Absolutely. We've got hundreds of vacant factories in this city. They're eyesores. We can take that, convert it into manufacturing facilities for housing. Okay? It makes sense. The buildings are sitting, doing nothing, eyesores. And so basically with the assets that Detroit already has, Detroit have to build a diverse economy. We've got to grow this economy. This $3 billion budget is not going to allow Detroit to sustain itself down the road here. We're already seeing where there's going to be financial shortfalls. I think the state bankruptcy group, they still want to keep hands on Detroit for the next year to make sure that it can, deal with its financial issues and obligations. So we've got to grow this economy in Detroit. There's no other way. For all of the programs that's needed in our city, the only way we'll be able to bring those programs in, I'm speaking about programs for returning citizens, we've got to find ways to reduce crime in our community. It must be a safe city. We need a police lab here in our city so that police officers can solve crimes.
When you say police lab, let's back up on that for a second, because we do already have like a cold case unit. We do have evidentiary labs. We have a partnership with Michigan State Police. The FBI often works with us. So some of that evidentiary support is there.
Yeah, the question is, if you have a homicide and it has to be sent to the state lab or to the FBI lab, that's time. When you're trying to solve a crime, time is of the essence.
Yeah, I mean.
So that's why I'm saying we need that right here in Detroit.
We're definitely going to get to crime, but I want to back up because I want to hone in on this idea of manufacturing, because it is a very interesting idea. The question is, who would these people be? And the problem with CBOs is that if there were, say, not enough workers that a project could get in the city of Detroit who were qualified to build homes, right? I mean, you're talking about a scandal on your hands if you weren't able to get enough qualified builders, say, to put up housing. And then in general, the idea of the city manufacturing private structures sounds like socialism to me. Well, sounds like communism to me.
But when you talk about corporate welfare, what are you talking about? You're talking about socialism. You're talking about taking public funding. For example, mostly all of the projects downtown, they use taxpayer dollars to pay for the infrastructure. They use taxpayer dollars to pay for to loan money in the project, and then you give 25, 30, 35-year tax abatements. Then you're looking at, tax abatements, tax capture, tax increment financing. So the question becomes, what did the Detroit taxpayer get out of the development? When most of Detroit, 42% poverty rate, most Detroiters cannot go downtown, buy expensive tickets, eat downtown, pay $25, $35, $45 for parking. So what did the Detroit taxpayer get for their dollar? Now, I'm not against development. I'm not against downtown development. But those are the questions that Detroit residents should be asking themselves. And the answer is simple. It's close to zero.
Well, and since you asked the question, just to push back, because that's my job to do that. I won't leave it as rhetorical. If you have a development that goes up and there are a bunch of apartments there, the thing the Detroiters got is housing, is quality housing, is a place that's safe and clean that they can live in, and some structures that they can buy. The Bedrock project that I mentioned in Brush Park, several of those townhomes can be purchased, and many of them are interesting, unique, and lovely homes. So that's what Detroiters got from all of these
I don't have
properties.
a problem with condos and townhomes being able to be bought. I just think it's important that people have the option to have home ownership. And we understand this question of generational wealth and home ownership.
Sure, building equity, that's a pathway to the middle class. And
there you go, and that's what we need in Detroit, the middle class.
Yeah. And to be fair, the median income here is just slightly above half of what the region is, about $36,000.
Yes.
Depending on the data you look, some say it's as high as $40,000, but still, that's dismal. There's something that can be done there. I want to move on because I know you talked about your relationship with Qatar and being involved in trade negotiations, and that is something that we are facing as we speak. The uncertainty of tariffs, and I just was talking about it yesterday, that allegedly in Q2 we saw 3% GDP growth. It's very possible that we might see a softening of the economy, which will affect us. We're going to lose about $826 million in federal funding. That COVID era money is almost gone. And there are many programs that were funded strictly based on the federal dollars.
Yes.
And then we have the uncertainty of tariffs, many of these negotiations ongoing. So, of course, the mayor of Detroit doesn't directly affect federal policy, but Mayor Mike Duggan had a relationship with the Biden administration previously, and certainly this kind of city and the leader of this city is going to have relationships with the federal government. So do you believe you can build those relationships to bring funds into Detroit, and how so?
I think so. Being a businessman, 54 years domestic and international business, I speak business language and bring business solutions. And I think the Trump administration and the federal government will be open to types of solutions that make sense. Okay. And so when we're looking at a downsizing of the economy, when we're understanding that our primary local economy is based off of the auto or manufacturing and some service companies, clearly we need to build and focus on building a diverse economy. We've got to bring different streams of revenue into our city.
What are those different streams? What are specifically those different streams that you'd like to see?
Where those streams will come from?
What types of streams, yes.
Oh, well, you got to bring in international companies here into Detroit. You've got to give some of these other companies opportunities to move, domestic companies to move into Detroit. This is a very important thing. Atlanta, Georgia is an international city. They have 1,400 international companies. They have a diverse economy. Detroit is an international city with an international border, and it has 0 international companies. So when you talk in terms of having relationships in Qatar, Dubai, and China, Africa, the Caribbean, etc., you have to have a broad enough thinking and understanding of how to facilitate business opportunities. And that's what the next mayor needs to be able to do, to bring in these other sources of revenue.
Let's talk about the effect that this has had on our big three. General Motors said that they had a loss of $1.1 billion in Q2 as a result of tariffs. Ford is saying that they had about $800 million in losses as a result of tariffs. And Detroit is ranked right there at the top, depending on what survey, but certainly in the top 10 of cities that are affected by trade negotiations, particularly, of course, with whatever eventually happens with Canada. What can you do? I mean, again,
well, first and foremost,
you're not the federal government, but what can you do?
I think you can always take it, for example. I don't want to go too far off the right here, but I want to say this. Detroit City Airport, it's an asset. And we get the necessary runway that we need there now. Now we can look at options of doing business in the Caribbean, doing different things to negotiate with these other countries or these other companies in these countries, and then going to the federal government to see how we can get relief or fix it so that we can continue or start to do business in and with these other countries. In other words, you've got to start the facilitation of an opportunity. You've got to look at these countries or companies in these other countries and see how they can prosper in Detroit. And you've got to do the same thing domestically. You've got to build a different type of framework to bring those people to the table. Then you can go to the federal government and say, this is what we have. It's going to create jobs. It's going to bring revenue into our city treasury. Local municipals are going to have to stand on their own power because we clearly see the federal government cutting. We clearly see the tariffs have hurt the auto companies and other small businesses. But on the other hand, look at the impact if GM should shut down. I know right now the auto plants have growing inventories. We clearly see the economy is slowing up. So now you need an aggressive mayor that has a open mindset the clear skill set to start to pair up the options that we have to bring industries into Detroit. When I did the China delegation, they actually wanted to bring a microchip manufacturing facility here in Detroit.
And what was the issue?
The issue was it was blocked by people who did not want to see it come into Detroit.
And why wouldn't they want that?
Well, now you're opening up another door, and being right there, seeing it, and also after the delegation left China, I was called into the office, the government office, and they asked me some questions, and they wanted to know why it was being blocked. And so that's an issue. That the same question is, why don't Detroit have any international business? Now, I'll just say this right now, and I'll be very quick, very frank. Sometimes trying to control a population is not a good thing. And one thing throughout the history of this country is that when you talk about gentrification and how it impacted majority black communities across this country.
Now re-gentrification, really.
You're absolutely right. So now, why do you need a good transit system if your plan by the powers that be is to gentrify a city? Why do you need to allow good paying jobs to come into a city when you're trying to gentrify a portion of the population? So you just said, we're in gentrification now. Now, most people don't understand where gentrification started from. It started in London, England. And it was started to control the people who were coming from the Commonwealth countries in London. They were starting to get economically too strong. So now this door is open. Now we're talking about Black Wall Street, Black Bottom, all the situations in the history in this country where they have implemented gentrification, moved people out, destroyed generational wealth, moved businesses out. So in the South, primarily, they would always, these controllers of your city, they would always say, we don't want these companies coming in. We have a population here that we can pay the wage that we want to pay them. So now what we're going to do, we're going to keep that company from coming in. Because if that company comes in, it's going to raise the bar, and now the wages will change. Now nobody's going to work for us anymore. We're not going to make the profit that we're making. So I think a lot of that has happened in Detroit as well.
I want to always touch on these last two things before I let you go and we wrap up here, which is obviously crime. You sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier. I checked with the Detroit Police Department on Friday. We saw a 30% reduction in non-fatal shootings. We did have another child killed over the weekend.
Yes.
So some of these numbers are now lagging behind. And obviously we're doing this first thing Monday, but there has been a reduction in shootings and a reduction in homicides by about 15.6% as of, again, Friday. But children being shot and killed in their own homes, how do we make that 100+ number zero?
We've got to change the culture here in the city of Detroit. And, you know, you look at the economy. So if the economy's downsizing, if the resources are not going into the community, you know, people go to crime. Your returning citizens come home. They go back to crime if nobody puts the resources there. And that's why I speak so much about building this diverse economy, understanding we must bring money into Detroit to fund these programs. If you're changing the culture, that means we've got to start with the children are young. In China, Japan, and countries like that, they spend 2 or 3 years teaching their young people when they start school about respect, not bullying. All of these different things are in their culture. In order for us to change the culture here in Detroit, we're going to have the money and the resources to address these problems. But I will say this, if you have a thriving economy, there have been thriving economies even in the Depression. There were cities that were doing well, that weren't suffering like many other cities in this country. So we understand that to address this issue of crime, it's going to be some work needed. But I do think the quicker that our police can solve violent crimes, and I'm going to make it known, I lost my older son here in the city from homicide. So I know what it feels like. And my condolences goes out to the families that are suffering. And there are a lot of people who are suffering when these crimes go unsolved. We need to make sure that we're solving crimes in the city. And so when people realize that they will be caught, when that percentage of solving crimes go up, then people will think 2, 3, 4, and 5 times before they kill someone or do violent crime. So in order for us to address it, we've got to wrap our arms around this whole scenario and change the culture and put the resources where they belong.
M-STEP scores in the Detroit Public School Community District are still struggling, especially when it comes to literacy and third grade reading levels.
Yes.
Last was 11.7% of third graders can read at or above grade level. That's it. That's it. Everyone else, all the other third graders, are below the standard.
That's why, as mayor, I want to partner the city with Detroit Public Schools, charter schools, private schools in the city of Detroit. We need to address the literacy issue. Our children need to be able to read and comprehend and do math. And so I'm going to find money out of our budget. That's why we're focused on bringing money into our city treasury, because I'm the candidate that says what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, where am I going to get the money. And so I want to make sure that we set up, partner with these institutions to make sure that we give them money and resources to help make sure that when our children graduate high school, they not only have the literacy, but they also have math, and they also know and understand how local politics works. When they graduate high school, they need to understand how local politics works and how it affects their life from A to Z. Too many of our children are coming out of high school with a diploma and don't know how it works. And when you ask them the question, you will see that they don't know. So we need to make sure that they know.
Let's, final question here.
Yes.
What do you wish Detroiters would know about you and about this race for mayor?
That I have the necessary skills to bring back our city, that it makes sense to build a diverse economy. It also makes sense to manufacture our own homes, to make sure that our own city developers, residents, builders, contractors have an opportunity to have big contracts in the city, that we do need procurement and inclusion programs to make sure, because that depends on economic empowerment. We must have in Detroit, and that's what I, Joel Haashiim, want to do. I'm asking for your vote because we need economic empowerment. We have money, but we don't have economic empowerment. We have votes, but we don't have political empowerment. We have education, but we don't have educational empowerment. And that's what I want to bring here to the city of Detroit. I want to put money in the pockets of our community, in the pockets of the people. I want to give insurance relief on auto and car. I want to bring back or bring in universal basic income to help us bring our community out of poverty into the middle class. I want to make sure that Detroit is a thriving city even in tough times, that we can stand on our own and hold our own, bringing back the culture and the spirit of our great city.
Thank you. Mr. Haashiim, appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.